Kansas drops to 4-3 on the season. Ugly final score against Texas Tech. Certainly felt like KU had some chances to make it closer and make it a game. We're going to break down some of the frustrating, conservative decisions and some of the things that led to this loss. And we'll try to come to an end of this of just how good is this Kansas football team.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks, a little post-game recap from the KU Texas Tech game. Jayhawks fall in Lubbock, and kind of a complicated description of the game, but we're going to break it all down on today's episode of the show. Thank you so much to the everydayers catching each and every episode. Thank you so much for listening anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's LOJ, we're going to recap what happened in KU's loss to Texas Tech. We're going to get into our awards, our stats of the game, our moments of the game, as well as our KU game balls, even though they fell short down in Lubbock. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned later for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward. Mazda, move and be moved. Kansas falls in Lubbock to Texas Tech, and I think the final score, it's interesting because the first quarter of the game, if you just look at quarters 1, 3, and 4, Texas Tech could have won by 800 points. But if you look at how KU played in the second quarter, it's like KU was the better team for that specific quarter. So overall, the final score, it felt like one that, it felt like for certain moments of the game, it felt closer than that, I guess. This almost reminds me of that game down in Austin, the game that Jalen ended up not being able to play when they lost to Texas. And that was kind of a blowout loss, but there were a few moments there where you're like, well, if this goes differently, maybe it's a closer loss or maybe they have a chance here or there. But in the end, Texas Tech just kind of, dominates in certain facets, and that's the difference in winning this game. And so you have a horrendous start. You have a great response. Credit to that. But then a combination of things in the second half, the defense finally starting to relent again against the run after a good second quarter, and it really started the third quarter too. Timid, I would say, play calling would be one way of putting it in the third quarter in KU. And I definitely think one thing was apparent all game long, and this is something we talked about coming into the game, that Texas Tech has one of the best, if not the best, defensive lines in the country. And it was pretty apparent that Kansas was dominated and outmatched in the trenches. And that's just going to make things a lot more difficult for everyone involved. It's going to make things more difficult for Jalon Daniels. It's going to make things more difficult for the play caller. It's going to make things more difficult for the coaches and just everybody. If you're consistently getting pressure, if you're not winning at the point of the attack, if you can't just carve out 4 or 5 yards a run, if your quarterback's constantly under pressure, it changes the types of plays that you might feel comfortable throwing out there. And it was very apparent, that difference in the trenches in this one. To Kansas' credit, in the second quarter and at different moments, they found a way to fight through it or scheme through it, or have Jalon Daniels just perform really well at moments. Whatever it was, it just overall really felt like the Missouri game, where I think that difference in the line of scrimmage really showed itself in the running game. Obviously you saw it more in the Texas Tech game in the sack column. I want to say Kansas was sacked against Missouri twice, threefold, fourfold in this one against Texas Tech. So that was certainly different, but the running game, and this doesn't just go for the line of scrimmage, the KU offensive line versus the Texas Tech defensive line. The Texas Tech offensive line was opening up huge holes against the Kansas defensive line. And, the running game difference was just, monstrous, monumental, the difference kind of between the two. And so some of that, again, was a little expected coming in, but I don't know that you ever expected to be as big of a difference as it was in the KU Missouri game. If you go into a game and say they're going to have the edge of the line of scrimmage, and you say they're going to rush for 100 more yards than you, you're like, okay, that's a good amount, but I could see it happening. You don't really expect it to be like a 200-yard difference. And in this game, it ends up, being more than that. And you end up in a situation where, for a moment there, I was wondering, was Kansas going to get Samaje Perine against the Texas Tech running back Dickey, who had just a monstrous day against KU. Obviously, it didn't end up happening and the game wasn't close enough to keep him in and stuff. But I guess I'm not saying you want that to happen, and it's not, you don't want it to repeat itself, and it's not great. You would like that to shore itself up. And again, if they're going to have an advantage, at least make it so that it's not just a complete game wrecking advantage. But it at least is a little more understandable when you look at the talent on that Texas Tech defensive line, and you look at Kansas kind of having a rebuilding year on the offensive line. What isn't understandable to me is two things. Because, again, if you want to talk about the Jimmies and Joes, the talent athleticism that Texas Tech has acquired, right? Like, credit to them. They have invested, they've spent money, and it has gone to a really good level. Like, tip of the cap to them for doing that. And you can see some of that advantage on the defensive line versus the offensive line, right? It shows up there. So to a certain level, yes, you would like to perform a bit better, but you can understand at least a bit of it. The things that are hard to understand is why was there that complete kind of no-show early? Why was, your first two Texas Tech touchdowns, why were they just completely untouched? Why are you giving up a 2-point conversion where it's just, I don't know, a lack of knowing what's going on or focus or whatever, like just mistakes, making drops, like missing blocks, stuff like that. It felt like early on in the game, the first quarter of the game felt like I was watching 2010s Kansas football. And that part is a little harder to understand. You're going on the road against Lubbock, like huge game, playing in a juiced up environment. Why are you not more ready coming into this game? The other one that is hard for me to understand and a little bit, head scratching is the lack of aggressiveness. I guess you would say late in the game, once you get later in the fourth quarter, the game's out of reach. Like, you can understand final 5-6 minutes of the game, whatever. Like, just don't get guys hurt, I guess. But really the start of the third quarter on until, I don't know, like the beginning of the fourth quarter or something, when it's at least within 35-17 at that point and in, 21-17, 28-17, 35-17. Those are all points where it's like, okay, you should be aggressive here. You were a 2-touchdown underdog on the road who has already made a cool comeback to get to this point. And now you're down at different points, 4, 11, 18 points. Be aggressive. Be aggressive, because here's the deal. You lost this game, like, what's the difference at the end of the day if Kansas would have lost this game 56-17 versus if you lose it, I don't know, 63-24 versus if you lose it 42-17? Like, is there that big of a difference in how you feel? Go for it, like, play aggressively there. So that was certainly unfortunate for me, because it did feel like you kind of figured things out in the second quarter. It did feel like when Bengali Kamara had that big TFL on the first Texas Tech drive of the second half that KU had the ball down for, they had a shot. And then kind of from then on, it just felt like KU turtled up, so to speak. Like, you went into your shell, and then you combine turtling up with Texas Tech figuring out the running game again. Like, Tech had it in the early going, and then they lost it, and then Tech figured it back out in the running game. It felt like to me that there was a certain level of, when it was 28-17, which feels like too early to do this. I would even argue 35-17 would be too early to do this. It felt like there was a certain point where the coaching decisions changed to being, let's not lose by 40. Let's not lose by, X amount. And let's try to, not overdo this. And I don't know. I don't know that that's like a conscious conversation, but it felt like that's how things went. So if you look at this, like from a glass half full approach, you would say, hey, KU still doesn't have like a bad loss. I know you get kind of blown out here. Jalon still played really well in this game. Bengali Kamara at moments looked like a star. I don't feel worse about KU against the pass defensively. Like, honestly, I might actually feel slightly better about KU's pass defense coming into this game. I know that the first quarter was ugly, but it was ugly for everything KU did. Overall, Texas Tech, was 50% completion rate for 133 yards. Like, if anything, I feel better about the pass. So those would be, glass half full things. Glass half empty things. KU can't run the ball when it matters, I guess, or like against elite fronts. Now, again, if we're going back to glass half full, you could argue, how many more elite fronts does KU play? You play Texas Tech and Missouri. Those could be two of the top 5 or 10 in the country. Texas Tech might be number 1. How many more do you have on the schedule? You would think Utah is up there, but like, is Utah to the same level Tech and Missouri are? I don't know that they're there. They're probably like top 25. And so from that perspective, is that something you do have to worry about the rest of the way? Because at least when Kansas has been playing against teams that are more on their level in the trenches, it hasn't been Devin Neal level rushing, but they've still been able to find games where they have 150, 200, 250 rushing yards. So, like, again, I can go back and forth on that one. But overall, the offensive line, like, that's another glass half empty thing, is a problem. But again, you could point to that and say, when the offensive line has played teams that are not great fronts, they've done well. When they're playing teams on their same, caliber, they've done okay too. It's just when they're playing the elite teams that they've really struggled. But again, how many of those do you play? And also, it's a little understandable from the standpoint of, hey, you went from losing Dominic Pooney, an NFL starting lineman, to losing Bryce Cabeldue and Logan Brown to, all Big 12 or NFL level offensive tackles. There was going to be a level of step back here. And so the fact that you're still doing well against the teams on equal playing ground as you, but struggling against elite opponents, it is kind of understandable to me. I do think, though, that Kansas probably regrets not making left tackle more of an open conversation in the offseason, but, we'll get more on that later. But I would also say glass half empty. You can't stop the quarterback run, which gulp, Kansas State is next with Avery Johnson. And then also the biggest glass half empty to me is the continued lack of aggression, the being too conservative with things in play calling. We'll get more into that in segment 2, but I guess this is kind of the bottom line to me. You were expected to lose. I don't think this changes the outlook of the team at this point. Obviously, you would have liked to have the Cincinnati win, where this one mattered a little less. But at this point in time, like, you've played, this is crazy for me. You've played 7 games this year. Kansas is 4-3, and I have zero clue whether they're a good team or not. And maybe that is the answer. If you don't know through 7 games, then you are in that middle. And maybe that's okay too, right? We said coming into the year, win 6 or 7 games, like, that's a fine season. You get back to bowl eligibility, and that would be where that would put you. But certainly, I don't know. There have been moments this year where you almost beat Cincinnati, where you almost beat Missouri, where you were making that great, glorious comeback early on in this game toward the end of the first half, where you did start to, convince yourself and feel like maybe there is more than that. Maybe there's just not, unfortunately. All right, let's get to awards, stats, moments of the game next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by DoorDash. It is the weekend. Time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order. These players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. For Kansas, this game obviously wasn't the game they wanted to have. You lose by 25 points, but I thought Jalon Daniels played really well. 27 of 33, 228 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. He's under pressure. He's under duress all game long, still stuck with it. And, he delivered in a big way in that comeback for KU in the second quarter. Obviously, didn't bear itself out, but I thought he deserved better than the final score here. Just like Jalon Daniels performed for Kansas here, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday you order. Stack it up all season. You can save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season's here, and FanDuel has an offer that you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the application. If you would have got Kansas first half plus 9.5, you would have felt great about the second quarter. If you would have had Kansas for the game at plus 14.5, you would have not felt so great about it. But you can get some action for Sunday on FanDuel. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for joining us on this episode of LOJ. And again, Kansas falls 42-17 in Lubbock. So we're going to get to our moments and plays of the game, stat of the game, and awards, and we'll get to game balls. If we're looking at the positive moments for KU, nothing really in the first quarter. I would say, like, some of the positives, KU stopping Tech to back-to-back red zone field goals that made it 21-0 instead of when it could have been 29-0. I think that allowed them to have some hope and get back into it. The Jalon Daniels touchdowns to LaShawn Williams and Bowden Gruen were huge for KU to just kind of get that momentum. the back-to-back throws to Cam Pickett, the second and 15, pick up 14 yards. Then the next play, 19 yards. Those were all big as well. And then, I mean, how about it was mishandled. We're going to get into the game management stuff here in a second. It was mishandled to get to this point, but it worked out in the end for KU because the defense ended up getting a stop with under 2 minutes to go. You get the ball back, you drive down, Laith Marjan hits a 55-yard field goal. That was a huge moment in the game. And then the Bengali Kamara TFL. They had 3rd and 1 around midfield. Bengali shoots in, great game for him, and they lose 5 yards. They have to punt. And then you're down 21-17 with the ball. Those were all great moments that felt like it was leading up to something. Gone just like that. And that's certainly unfortunate there. Our stat of the game, I mean, the rushing yards has to be the one, right? We could point to like the sacks and the TFLs. I think that'd be fair, and that obviously contributes to it, right? But Texas Tech had 372 rushing yards. Kansas had 74. Texas Tech had 9.3 yards per rush. Kansas had 1.9. I mean, that's your difference. But again, you can point to a 14-5 advantage in tackles for loss. You can point to a 9-1 advantage in sacks. You can point to a 111 yards lost on tackle for loss. For Kansas, 13 tackles or yards lost on TFLs for the Kansas defense. So that's a huge difference. And then you look at this, like defensive run stuff rate. Kansas was in the 0th percentile in this game. And then in havoc rate, Texas Tech was in the 81st percentile. So you combine that. Also, I would say explosive plays. I mean, how many just big explosive runs did Texas Tech have? Well, Kansas today had just a 3% explosive play rate that ranked in the 5th percentile. So those would be the ones that I would certainly point to for stat of the game. Awards, let's talk about the game management flubs of the week. These are the things that we're critical of that, you know, I've said before, like Lance Leipold is a very good coach. The coaching staff that, you know, I like what DK McDonald and Jim Zabrowski overall have done and some of the schematic things that they do. There are just too many times that it's too conservative for Kansas, which, again, I go back to the idea that to me, I'm sure part of that is for Lance Leipold, right? You're coaching as the best team in D3 every year. Like, it probably is better to be conservative when you're the best team in college football, right? Where you're so much better than these other teams. It makes sense. But now at Kansas, like, you are the underdog here. You have to kind of change that mentality. And it feels like it just hasn't happened. So see, these are some of the moments that stick out to me. So the idea that Kansas was, it ended up working out again, but the idea that Kansas, so when it was 21-7, they complete the pass to Cam Pickett on the 3rd and 1 with about a minute 30 to go in the first half. And they run a hurry up afterwards. And then, like, shortly after that, they throw a pass, the guy goes out of bounds. They clearly were not trying to run out the clock on the first half to try to score and not leave Tech much time. And Kansas ended up getting the stop, but like that could have very easily been a repeat situation of the Cincinnati game where Cincinnati gets a field goal late and that ends up being the difference, right? Too often that happens for Kansas where they don't run things out even further. They ended up getting the stop and they ended up getting a field goal out of it, but like, I don't know, just process-wise, that wasn't great. Process-wise, I feel like every 2nd and long for Kansas is a running play or a screen. If it's 2nd and 20, if it's 2nd and 15, it's going to either be a draw or a screen. Every single time, man. And that gets a little frustrating at times, especially when you have a really good quarterback, one that you should trust with Jalon Daniels. I don't know if you guys saw on Friday night, Cornell punted on 3rd and 25, which I think the idea being if you don't have a great offense, they're not expecting it because they don't have any returners back and you can get way more yards on the punt. But it's like, if you have a good offense, you have a good quarterback, you should never do something like that. I am a little bit worried that one day they're going to do that. Anyway, speaking of punting, it was 28-17. You punted on the plus 40. It ended up being a 20-yard net difference. That's brutal. And the play that leads up to it. So here's part of the issue too. Kansas had back-to-back 3rd and 1s on back-to-back drives, down 21-17 and then 28-17. The one that they're backed up at their own end when it's 21-17, they run up the middle, they get stuffed. Then on the one down 28-17 on the 3rd and 1, they try to run a play action pass and get sacked. The block was just whiffed. Two things. On the 3rd and 1 at the plus side, if you're going to run play action, I have no problem with that. In fact, I love running play action in that situation. But I think you got to move the pocket, especially against as good as the Tech D-line is. That's maybe, being a little bit more hypersensitive to it, though. Here's the bigger issue to me. I think those should have been flipped situations. Think about it this way. The 3rd and 1 back at your own end, if you run the ball and get stuffed, you are punting the football because you're too far backed up at your own end of the field, right? So that situation is the one where you should have run play action. Then when you had the 3rd and 1 at their, whatever it was, like 31-yard line, that's the one where you should run the ball. Because think about it. If you're at their 31-yard line, hey, if we run the ball here on 3rd and 1, we'll go for it on 4th and 1. We'll tush push, we'll run play action, whatever it is. That's the one you should run the ball, knowing that, hey, worst case, we lose a yard, it's 4th and 2. I think those were switched. But then beyond that, when it's 4th and 10, down 11, you're a 2-touchdown underdog. Just go for the 4th and 10, man. People would have understood. People would have understood if you don't get it and then they go down and get a touchdown. Just annoying. And then again, I think this is when it was 35-17. Like the game's probably over, but whatever. But it's 3rd and 38 for Kansas. You're down 18 and you run the football. I get, again, I don't know. You're basically saying, we're probably not going to win this game, which they didn't, but especially with that mentality. Why would you not throw the ball deep there? It's 3rd and 38. Here's the thing. If your guy makes an incredible catch or they have a coverage bust, great. You pick up the first down. What if they have a pass interference? What if they have a defensive holding call that only ends up being 5 or 10 yards or 15 yards, but it's an automatic first down? What's the worst case scenario there if you throw it deep? You get sacked and then you punt anyway. You throw an interception. But if you're throwing deep, the interception is going to be like the punt anyway. It's those moments of process that I think are a little bit frustrating and too conservative in moments like this. That feels like the floor is very high, I think, in general, compared to where KU was with Lance Leipold. The floor is so much higher than it was with David Beatty and Charlie Weiss and on and on and on. The ceiling, though, is not as high as I think some people would like it to be, and that's part of it, right? But yeah, so that's our game awards. Isn't really an award. Let's give some real awards. Game balls coming up next. Who are the heroes we didn't deserve tonight? This is Locked On Jayhawks. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Mazda, moving the game forward. For those who believe it's not just about playing the game, it's about redefining it. There's moments that do more than put points on the board. They move crowds, move culture, and keep moving the game forward. This week's moment that moved the game forward, I guess you would have to pick a lot of Texas Tech ones, but if we are talking about the Kansas one, let's talk Laith Marjan, man. Hitting a 55-yard field goal. KU adds this new kicker from South Alabama. He's been great so far for KU. He's been a weapon, and that was the ultimate peak of how much of a weapon this guy truly is, which certainly makes you feel better for, if we're talking long-term takeaways, having Laith Marjan, that's a good long-term takeaway from this game for KU. So when you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Game balls from KU Texas Tech. Jayhawks falling 42-17. Our two offensive game balls, we're going to start with Jalon Daniels. Again, he played a good game. 27 of 33, 228 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks, 82% completion rate. And that was, KU got sacked 9 times, that is just unbelievable. The amount of pressure he had to deal with, and you're still delivering, strikes and passes and some big time throws at times. Very impressed with Jalon Daniels. He's having a great year, man. And sucks they're only 4-3 right now, because I legitimately think, let's say if they beat Cincinnati and beat Missouri and they make this one closer, if they were 6-1, he would legit be one of the top 5 in the Heisman race, legitimately 5 or 10. I don't know. Yeah, so that sucks. So Jalon gets a game ball here today. Bowden Gruen gets a game ball. 13 catches. When you have 13, you usually see carries there. 13 catches for a tight end, 76 yards and a touchdown. Now, You're not getting a ton of yards per catch there, but he was the safety blanket. Just keep the ball moving forward. And in a game where Kansas couldn't run the ball, basically short passes to Bowden Grown became running the football for KU to get those kind of easy completions forward. He also had the big touchdown, 24 yards out. So those are the two game balls for the offense. Although honorable mention for Daniel Highshaw coming back to it. 8 carries, 53 yards. Some of that was in garbage time, but just good to see him back in the lineup. And, hopefully that'll give Kansas a little extra push for the back half of the season. Defensive side of the ball for KU, game balls, we have to give to Bengali Kamara. He had 4 tackles. 3 of them were tackles for loss. He also had a pass breakup. He was just making big play after big play. And then things got bad for KU, but he was seemingly single-handedly stopping Texas Tech at moments of the game. And so he definitely deserves one there. I'm trying to think who would be the other guy. I felt like Lyric Rawls made a bunch of big hits. He had 10 tackles. He had 2 pass breakups and a quarterback hit. So that would probably be a good one. Definitely feels like, I don't know, I'll be interested to see some of the PFF grades, but certainly the pressure numbers, the sacks, the lack of it there, the amount of times that Tech ran up the middle and just ran and got a push. Felt like probably that'll be the worst game for the KU D line this year. Again, you're not going to always play as good of O-lines maybe or as big of ones as Tech, though. You've had some other ones that you've had a little trouble with, but still, I guess we'll do Lyric Rawls. 10 tackles for him with those 2 pass breakups. He had some big sticks, to say the least. So that'll be good for the defense game balls. And then special teams, we have to go Laith Marjan. Hit a 55-yard field goal. That's enough for me. Felt like it should have been a huge moment in the game for KU. They obviously couldn't capitalize, but it was a good finish to the first half and clearly showed some real potential for Marjan moving forward the rest of the game. But that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. We'll be back on Monday to get more takeaways from this game, kind of dive deeper into KU's loss to Texas Tech. And then we'll talk a lot of KU basketball next week. Late Night in the Fog is next Friday. And the following week will be a big one because KU has an exhibition with Louisville in basketball and KU plays K-State in football. So make sure to subscribe to the show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. See you next time with Locked On Jayhawks.